Hello and welcome to A Kind of Meadow with Rhiannon, a podcast that invites you to witness the magic of energy work through hearing stories straight from the soul. I'm your host, Rhiannon, a writer, startup founder, energy work practitioner, and the librarian of this Akashic library. Each week, I guide a guest through a healing session around a topic of their choosing, from money stuff to anger at the patriarchy. Really, nothing is off limits. You'll hear their stories, insights, and transformations as we journey through the meadow, a sacred healing portal where anything is possible. We'll follow our guest through time and space and hopefully get a little healing ourselves along the way. Whether you're curious about energy work, passionate about healing, or simply looking for inspiration, this podcast is for you. I am so excited to be back with a new episode. It's been a little bit. And you know what? It didn't feel like it. I will admit, I experienced time blindness. And when I say that, I mean this episode today is one from August 8th, the Lionsgate portal, which was cool because it was a really interesting energy. And I think it took us really deep and really far in an intense way. I mean, we go straight to the void. So that portal was really magical. And to me, that felt like just a few weeks ago. But then I realized, is that 4 months, 3 months? I don't know. Anyway, it's here now. So I'm just going to set some expectations that because I do not feel time, I'm very good at being present. But also it means that this podcast may not follow a set rhythm that neurotypical people do, they're so good at doing stuff weekly or bi-weekly or whatever the schedule is. No, we'll just say that we follow a rhythm, and that rhythm is more like jazz than a metronome, which I'm okay with. And I hope you are too, because there is no time like the present. And whenever an episode comes out is the perfect time for it to come out. And actually, I really believe that. So I hope that it's a fun surprise when we get something new. I do have 3 episodes that I've recorded over the last 4 months, apparently. And so I'm hoping to drop those a little more consistently, especially now that we've got a new format. I have been thinking a lot about how does this podcast fit best with what my intention is. And honestly, my goal and my intention is to share these healings because I feel like just being a witness to a lot of these sessions, I get to experience a lot of healing from it because some of these insights are channeled. I don't know this stuff, or I only know it from my very limited perspective. And so seeing someone experience this with their specific angle at a problem, a similar problem to what I'm experiencing, really opens things up for me. It kind of pushes me out of my tunnel vision in a way where I feel so much more expansive. Really, the vision of this podcast is that if there are things that resonate with you, or even if it's not consciously, but even subconsciously, just listening to someone else's journey will offer you the same kind of healing that I feel like I get from listening to these healings as I do them. With that, I realized that what I'm going to start to do is now give you the full uninterrupted healing at the top, so you can hear the full journey of that without interruptions. And maybe think of it like a guided meditation where you're accompanying this person on their journey and you get to witness it from your angle and think about the things within yourself that may resonate. Let it light up all these atoms within you that vibrate the same, right? That resonate with these ideas that are being explored. Or think about how you would react when you go into the void or confronted with this worry or see this monster or creature or whatever it may be. Through your own journey of just listening to the healing, I'm hoping that we create a space for you to release things, reframe things, and truly get some healing vicariously through someone else. But it's not through someone else, it's through you. And this healing is just a way for you to get to practice your own healing. Isn't that lovely? And then after that, you'll just get the full conversation between me and the guest with the context. So they'll refer to things that happen to the healing. But if you just want to hear the conversation, you can jump to that. If you just want to hear the healing, you can skip to that. Or if you want to hear how the whole thing unfolds together, you get a full episode. I'm hoping that this new format creates a more like a richer conversation for you, and also, again, a meditation of sorts. Because meditation can be lots of things. And I think that dancing is meditation, walking is meditation, thinking about things is a meditation. When I think about stuff, I'll say, I'm going to meditate on that. Yes, we'll allow this to be more space for your own kind of meditation. Okay, so all that being said, let's get into this episode. This episode is really fun. I'm so excited to introduce to you our guest, Tamara Lucas. I met her through the Atlanta startup scene. She has this incredible company called myPANDA app, which is my personal assistant next door app, where she's bringing community together to really offer support for anyone who needs it, but specifically thinking about mothers. And so I love what she's doing. So many people have benefited from myPANDA or the seedling.
I'm the oldest of 4 kids, and that, I think, birth order is a thing. I definitely take on caretaking and making sure everyone's okay and, being responsible and doing all the things I'm supposed to do. And that sort of carried through. My mom, my grandmother, are really important figures, like matriarchal figures. My dad was around, but worked a lot, right? So it was influenced by female energy, and I have been forever. And I've gone through a lot of things trying to continue to help people. I have my degree in psychology and social work. I ended up getting, there's so many stories. I could go into so much, but I'm trying to keep it without being crazy. But, psychology, social work, because I wanted to help people, but I went into those fields just because I was already helping people, all my friends. And so I figured if I'm already doing this, I might as well get paid for it. So I might as well get a job that I can pay for this. But by the way, people, going into psychology and social work doesn't really get you very much money. But that also is this kind of goes into the whole money thing too, is money is only evil people kind of need money. Those of us that are good and giving back to the world, we're not doing it for money. So that kind of has been a strain through all of my time too, is that. So, anyway, so I did social work for a while, and then I was able to have a chance to go live in Italy for a little while, which was fantastic. And it was one of the bravest things I've ever done. And I just picked up and went and didn't know how long I was going to stay there for, and stayed for a year and a half. And it was a complete life-changing event, because the bravery that I did in just doing that, I was 29 and I just took off and didn't speak the language. And I knew where I was staying, but I stayed in an old renovated monastery, a 12th century monastery, helping this woman run it. And it was haunted, and it was just crazy. It was crazy, crazy time. But that was talk about a death and a rebirth. It was definitely a rebirth of me into my adult self, kind of. And then I came back to the US, and I was in the middle of a school year because I wanted to go back to teaching, because I was going to make the world a better place and, just work really hard at helping children and whatnot. But I decided to check out just the sales job for a little bit. And so that's when I got into wine and spirit sales. Yeah, it was an Italian distributor that I started working with. So then I spent the next 15, almost 20, at this point, it's been 20 years working, selling fine wines and whatnot, and loved it, learned so much. Actually made some money for a little while, which was great. Then 08 and 09 happened, and then people stopped buying really expensive wine. And then I had my kids, I have 2 kids, 2 boys, and they started taking a little more priority, and I started making a little less money and spending more time with my kids. And then I eventually got divorced from their dad. And then that was a whole nother rebirth. And that's when I really, I think, came into myself as I really feel like I am now, with my strength and my independence and my ability to just do it and be myself and connect with people and have the relationships with the friends and the colleagues that I can help really shine and make a difference in the world. And so that's been the last 10 years. And then when I started my company, it was I was still doing wine stuff, and it sort of started on the side. And then when COVID happened, the wine stuff just had to stop because I wasn't able to keep going and doing events and whatnot. And so then I just started putting everything into this business. And so now I'm doing myPANDA to try to help people like me, because I needed the help. And that kind of is, where I'm back to. I'm I want to help the world and make the world a better place. But I really want to make money doing it now, and I don't want to lose money doing it. So anyway, so that's kind of where I'm at, and in a nutshell, my voyage to get me to where I'm at right now. And my kids now are 15 and 11 and getting more independent. And yeah, so I'm still playing the motherly role and taking care of everybody, but trying to do it in a way where it strengthens me, just as much as it strengthens everyone else. So.
Now, the topic that Tamara wanted to explore was money and abundance. And I love doing abundance work. I love doing money work. It's funny because this is the second episode back to back where someone wanted to talk about abundance and money. And then it goes straight to, it's not up to me what we see, right? It's usually up to the guides, but specifically up to the higher self of the guest. And so in this case, money was very much tied in with survival, which, I'm right there with money. I've been in survival mode and I have, cut back in every way that I can. And I just got to survive. I just got to make it through. And so in doing this healing with Tamara, I had to very much confront my own connection between money and survival. And ultimately, what is survival mind but an intense fear of death? Because what are we surviving from if not death, right? At the core of it. So this healing really goes straight to, I think, the root and experiencing death, experiencing the void, experiencing, I feel like I'm being buried in all of my money troubles and experiencing what that means to be buried alive. And, I laugh because it ends up being really light and fun, but we talk about really dark things. I can't wait for you to hear it because I think that it's a very interesting adventure. We did a healing today related to your relationship with money. And I always like money healings because it's so, material. It's literally what I think of when I think of the material world. So it's like very much a part of being on Earth. And more specifically, it's more a part of being a human on Earth in this particular moment in time, because money means something very specific today that's different than what it was 50 years ago and 100 years ago and even 1,000 years ago. So it's something that's very necessary for survival in a way that I think it hasn't been before. And healings around money always show up like really differently for people. And so it's always interesting to see the different messages that come up, because I think that since money is so universal to being human today for survival, that it's always something that gives us perspective that I think can help us in daily life and translates to other people. It's always like a little clue every time about how money works. So, it's very material, very like physical, plain type of healing. And sometimes when that's the case, my guides make me get my shit together and clean. I have experience in microdosing, and it's so funny because anytime I try to take mushrooms, the mushrooms are like, clean your room first, clean your house, you better vacuum. And I think it's because mushrooms are also very earthly. They're always like, clean your space. So when dealing with money, apparently, my guides really like me to clear any clutter and clean up the space and create a lot of space. And in the healing today, I got the vibe that this is very much about receiving money. So I create a healing container and it just happens to be floating in space. Yours actually looked more like a wine glass, I would say, which is funny because you worked in wine, because I didn't even think about that until I said it out loud. Yeah, it looked more like a wine glass in that there was like a curvature to it. It wasn't like a flat, straight cylinder. I let it float in space. That way it has, scale is really different in space, which we really dive into in the healing. So being in space, it just creates a lot of exactly that space. And I ground the container in the center of the earth so it still feels connected and grounded. I plug the container into the center of the universe so we have the cosmic energy at our disposal too, so above and below. And then I call in any planetary support that wants to come in, and the planet Saturn specifically came in and orbited around the container, which felt like the words that popped into my head when Saturn showed up was like a return of Saturn, which I don't know, it happens like every 27 years or something. So it might not specifically be a Saturn return for you, but the Saturn return energy is this rebirth, stepping into my new chapter of life or next chapter of life, releasing who we thought we were and stepping into who we're becoming energy. So it actually felt pretty relevant to what we were exploring. So then we're dealing with money. So I called in the energy of abundance, and it was almost like this faucet turned on and started filling the wine glass full of this abundance energy. And so we just let it fill it up, let it overpour. When you overflow a cup, it also gets rid of any like dust or stuff that may have been inside of the cup. It just starts to spill over the edges and leaves just the water behind. So we let the abundance energy clear out any dust that may have settled in the container so that it was just pure abundance energy that you were going to be stepping into. So then I called you in, and immediately you were terrified. The abundance looked like water, and you were like, oh my God, I'm going to drown. I can't breathe. This is dangerous. I can't just dive in here. What's going on? And it's interesting because it looked like water, but it was like ghost water, in that it like didn't wet anything, or you couldn't touch it or feel it, but you could see it. And you thought that if you were going to dive in, you were going to drown, which is actually a really interesting way to think about your relationship with money. I don't know if this resonates at all, but it was almost like being in that much abundance. While it's desirable, it also felt suffocating, or like you were drowning, or that it was unsafe. That's when I realized that, okay, this is what we're going to be healing today, because in order to accept abundance, we do have to surrender to it. And to me, surrender looks like drowning. Or it does look like not drowning, but like letting it overtake us, letting it, like drag us to the bottom of the cup. So when I say we, I work with guides and angels. And so I often say we when I'm talking about stuff that I did with invisible people. So we put you in a bubble that would it became this like submersible so that you could float down into the container where I was waiting with my Reiki table for you, so that you felt safe. Because we don't want to like just throw you into the water and let you drown, and that's how you get over it or whatever. No, that's not the way either. We want you to feel safe and feel like you could survive while you're drowning in abundance. Then when you're ready, we could always pop the bubble, because it's just a bubble. So we brought you down in a bubble, and then you sat down, and it was like, oh man, I can see it. It looks really cool. But because there was this protective bubble around you, it couldn't touch you or get to you. So you could only witness it, but not be a part of it. I would say have it, but have it doesn't feel like the right thing, because it is like being surrounded by water. By having this protective bubble, you felt safer, and knowing that it was around you felt really safe, but it was never on you, in you, flowing through you. And so that's what we wanted to fix, because then it'll always just look like it's just at arm's length. So I start in the crown. Usually what I do for each energy center is I do a little it's almost like making cotton candy, where I'm pulling out all of the gunk that's stuck in any energy center, like whatever's sticky. I can spin around a little stick and catch all the gunk and then pull it out so that your energy flows in each energy center. So I start with your crown, and a lot of times people's crowns are like full of gunk. It's very sticky. It's a lot of other people's chatter can get stuck in the crown, a lot of pre-existing beliefs, but your crown was pretty impeccable. It was so clean. There wasn't a lot. I would get like a little wisp of something here and there, but otherwise it was like really clean. And it felt like there was a lot of space. Like you're really clear headed. There was a lot of space. Like your brain didn't fill up the whole space, which, how do I say this? it doesn't mean that your brain is like small, but it was almost like your brain had become encased in this protective, clear casing. And it was almost like it was put on display in a museum. Think of like how big the Met is. And then you go walk up to a case, your brain was in there and it was protected and it looked so beautifully pink and healthy and great and just on display. It seemed like your mind is really protected and protective of you. That's when I realized, okay, we need to get rid of the casing. You don't have any barriers to your brain. And when I said that, you were like, oh, no. What do you can't just expose the brain. And so we started to take off the layers. You had a hard shell that covered your brain and your spinal cord. Everything was dark and quiet and clear and calm, but it was because your nervous system was on high alert. And so it kept your brain, like you weren't distracted by other things. Your nervous system was like on high alert. So your nervous system was also in this encasing. I started to take off the outer and you're like, no. And so it was like, okay, well, this is blocking you. It's keeping your brain safe, but it's also keeping it closed off while your nervous system's in high alert. So what we want to do is we want to calm the nervous system to get you out of high alert so that you can create space for creativity. All our best problem solving happens when we feel really safe and when our nervous system is calm and when we're like bored. I think that's why it's like, go take a shower, go for a walk, and ideas pop into your head. I think it's because you feel safe. You're just, unless you're on high alert. And then our survival gets stuck in survival thinking. To me is the most basic. It almost creates binary choices. And I just got to do what I got to do to survive. And I say this from personal experience because I am very much like survivor mentality. Let's bootstrap it. Let's do what I got to do to stay afloat. And it can, in a way, inhibit creativity. It always gets you, like you can be a really good problem solver, but then you're just solving the problem and there's not that extra space to be bored and creative. We wanted to get to your nervous system, but to do that, we had to take off all these layers. Finally, you were like, okay, I can get on board with this. And so I let you take off the last layer, which was more like plastic wrap. And so you threw that into the fire. We throw things into the fire to transmute them when you're ready to release it. And so you threw it into the fire and immediately you were like, oh my God, it's so soft. It's really vulnerable. Everything felt really exposed. I mean, it looked like a brain. It looked like a pinkish, delicate, soft. You were like, don't touch it. Don't touch it. It's so fragile. You thought if we touched your brain that it would hurt. So we let you poke it so that you could see. You were like, whoa, it doesn't hurt. It just feels really vulnerable. And it felt like it's been a long time maybe since you felt really vulnerable, especially in your brain. Like there's this like softness. It felt like a baby, like that fragility, and all just looking at it made you feel really fragile. And this feeling of like, oh, now I'm really exposed meant that now instead of like waiting for the other shoe to drop, you were waiting for an axe to drop and it would chop you up, and it like a horror. Like it was very scary, like death. It wasn't just like, oh, fragile, I'm going to get hurt. It was like, oh, I'm fragile, I'm going to die. It was this really intense fear. And we wanted to get right into your nervous system to help calm that down. I wash over your brain and your spinal cord with water, and I like to coat it with honey because there's this sweetness and anti-inflammatory property to it so that it can calm everything down. And I run the honey all the way down your nerve endings, all the way to the fingertips. And so we let that heal you and coat your brain. So this part of you that felt really vulnerable and exposed now had this layer of honey, which is still soft, but protective in some way. For you, it seemed like protection meant hard. You needed a shield. You needed, a case, something hard, solid to protect you. And the thing that the guides wanted you to remember is that actually there are parts of us that need to be really soft in order to be healthy. And so they talked about the heart. Our heart is a muscle. And if it gets too hard, then we'll have a heart attack and die. It needs to be soft. being supple is really important. The same is true for our brain. If it gets too hard, it makes me think of plaques in the brain and Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or, like dementia. Having a hardness is not necessarily helpful. Even with bones, if our bones get too hard, then it's also dangerous for our body. There needs to be some like give or bounce or flexibility. And the imagery that they gave me about explaining where it can be, there's something about the brain where it's a net. The thing to remember is that it's a net of neurons. And so while it looks really vulnerable, it is vulnerable. Like that's part of the beauty of humanity is how fragile we are. I think about that a lot more now that we have children, and I can see it just how fragile humanity is. Like it's made me feel so connected to death in a very scary way that I was not prepared for in any way. But this fragility is an important part of life. And also, like, because your brain's a net, they gave me the image of the new Moon tires. It's like a mesh net, and it's actually better because you can't pop a tire and it can go over sharp things. And because there's a little bit of give with the mesh net, it's actually like safer. Kind of like how you would use, what are those gloves, the mesh gloves that you would use for a mandolin, like that kind of thing. The reminder was that it looks soft, but it is a net that is pretty protected. And all of these alarms kept going off because it felt really exposed. And that's when we saw keeping watch at your forehead and your third eye and connected to your eyes was, it looked like a bird with big eyes and a small beak and stick legs. And that's it. Like no body. You couldn't really see a body because its eyes were so big, like a stick drawing. And it was keeping watch of this whole conversation that we were having. And it sounded the alarm of like, okay, let's shut it down. This is too dangerous. It's too risky. And that's when I realized like, oh, we're not in a museum. This isn't encased in a museum. This is like a nuclear power plant. And I've got the image of Homer Simpson. I can see how like Homer Simpson has the big old eyes too. Homer Simpson at the nuclear power plant sitting at the control board or whatever. That's what this bird looked like, but in your third eye, keeping everything under control. And what it felt like was that if there was danger in your brain, that the risk of it felt like not just, oh, I'm in danger. It felt like fucking Chernobyl, the whole earth. There would be nuclear fallout in a 50-mile radius for the next 100 years. It wasn't just you that was going to be impacted by this danger. There's a lot of people that would be hurt by it. So the risk level was higher than even just, oh, I'm scared to die. It was nuclear. That's when I realized that this little bird who was sounding the alarm, who was keeping everything locked down, was actually an entity. And so we're going to do an entity removal. And for that, I break out a little tent that I call the outbreak tent because it feels like a quarantine tent from the movie Outbreak. And I put you in there with this little bird. And usually an entity is an aspect of us that has an invalidated feeling that needs to be held and expressed. This invalidated feeling creates a protective mechanism that takes over because it's like, I must be right then. If like no one's going to tell me otherwise, I must be right. The world is dangerous. Everything's going to be bad. And so it creates this protective mechanism, which in this case, it was this nuclear underground bunker that looked like a museum on the inside, but it was a mile of cement of protection around you. And it's almost like the eyes of this bird were like darting back and forth. It was on high alert, high alert. We let you sit in this quarantine tent with the bird so you guys could talk it out and see what was really going on. Tulsi, which is holy basil, wanted to hold you. Tulsi is like really good for the nervous system. It's really calming, but also great for the heart. Tulsi, I always imagine is like a plant that wants to hold your heart for you so that you don't have to carry the weight of your heart all by yourself. And then lavender showed up too, which also is like very good for the nervous system. They're called nervines, calming. What we do is we give both you and this bird earth energy. We bring up earth energy to hold you and support you so that you feel safe to express yourselves and speak what it is that you actually need. And when the earth comes up to hold you, it's like all of a sudden you and the bird feel really fragile and small. And that kept happening. We would bring earth energy up to hold you throughout the healing, just because it's a tool that I use to provide support while we're addressing something. And when the earth would come up, it would make you feel really weak, like you would collapse into the earth a little bit. And so this was the first time that really happened, where you like collapse into the earth. Just from being held, you got to be as fragile as you feel. And yeah, fragile was the word more than vulnerability. I think, yeah, it's a strength and we can feel vulnerable in a lot of moments and be really aware of our vulnerability. But this was beyond, speaking our truth in a time that it may be uncomfortable or whatever. This was a fragility. It was like a full on, I'm going to crumble. I'm breakable. And it really felt connected to death. It's almost like because it felt so connected to death, when the earth would come up to hold you, like it just looks like a column of dirt that comes and holds your legs to your hips to support you. It's almost like you thought that you were being buried. It was time to die. And so it would ring the alarm again, and like you would fight it and resist it and try to run away from it. So that's when we let you express, okay, so what's going on? And there was this really just intense, I'm afraid, I'm afraid, I'm afraid. And there was this really intense fear of death. In these healings, what's coming up are trapped emotions. And so it's almost like you have had fear, but not the space. You couldn't let yourself feel afraid because you were too busy surviving. And if you felt afraid, it would get in the way of what you had to do. When we're like, no, I choose surviving instead, or I don't have time to be afraid. I need to focus on this. It's not that the fear goes away. It just gets pushed into a space. And it's almost like this bird was an accumulation of all the fear. Like, I don't have time to feel it. And so this little bird was this creation that you made as a survival thing to feel all your fear for you. And it loved to live in your brain, because it got to see everything first and decide like, yes, no, safe, good, bad, whatever first. And it got to use all your fear in a way that felt productive and useful. But you still have all of this fear existing inside of you instead of being able to feel it and release it. And it almost felt like it was fear from a young age. And as we let you express your fear, which was like a lot of screaming and shaking and I'm scared, like just saying it out loud. And I don't know if you experienced a death at a young age, but it started to feel like you were very aware of death because of a loss. And underneath the fear was grief. There was like my heart ached after you got all the fear out of you. Underneath that, like you just started crying and sobbing. That's when the weight of it was gone enough that the guides, I don't even know, it was like a universal energy, something that I don't normally work with, came in the form of what felt like a wind. And it was like, okay, we're going to the next phase of this. And so this wind came and you were like ashes. And then when the wind blew, it blew you out into space. Your ashes just became stars floating in space. You realized that you were still you, even though you didn't have a body anymore, even though the ashes like still existed. It wasn't your body and you were stars. It was interesting because your stars were light years apart. So all of a sudden you're massive, but you don't feel massive because you have no body. And it's really dark and there's no sound. So you couldn't speak. And so it was like, oh my God. So you could communicate telepathically. And that's when you felt the presence of ancestors, like ancestors that had crossed over. And it felt like there was someone really important to you there who came to you right away and embraced you. And you didn't have a body. So it was like this merging of energy, this like embrace of energy where you knew it was a hug, even though you didn't have a body to hug and they didn't have a body to hug. I want to say she, it felt like a she. And so you crumbled in that moment again. And again, there's like no physicality to crumble, but it was this feeling of release again, of this really immense grief, but also feeling peace to know that you're still connected, even without the physical stuff matter. Like there was matter because there was energy. You were energy and you had stars that were a part of you, but it just was like different. And then all of a sudden it felt like that bird that had gone with you was like a young version of you that was just so happy to see this ancestor that had crossed over. And she felt at peace. And knowing exactly where this ancestor was, she could relax. She felt at peace. It wasn't scary anymore about like, where did she disappear to? Oh my God, everything that we could think about death and how scary it is and how sad it is. There was this peace. That aspect of you dissolved into this space and existed, like stayed with the ancestor. So you are at peace with your ancestor. And then you look around and you realize that you're in the void. Like it looked like space, but it's not just space. It's the absence of everything. And so it started to get suffocating, except there was nothing to breathe. So it was hard to breathe. You began to panic. There was like this sense of nothingness, of not existing that felt terrifying. And so I kept asking my guides, well, what are we supposed to do? And the game plan was to let you exist, to let you feel the void, to let you witness the void. Because there was something about, this like very intense fear of death that it felt like your guides wanted you to experience the part of you that exists beyond humanity. And to do that, you had to be blown into space and you had to go all the way into the void so that you could come back from that and experience all there is to life, so that you know that there's something beyond life that still exists. Like you can never be nothing. Even in the void of nothingness, you had consciousness, like you had an experience there. And I think in the real void, you may not be able to be like, oh shit, I'm scared. I don't think there is that. But because you still had like your human consciousness experiencing the void, it was a lot. But once you realize that you didn't not exist, you could release into it and accept it a little bit. And once you accepted it, it was like, okay, this spark, this heat, it started to feel like this spark started to ignite in you. And that created this nebula that you were like floating gas that then started to compress and come together and become a shooting star. And so you became this shooting star heading to Earth. And while flying through space, you got to feel like, in space, size is so different than it is here. And so it's almost like you got to feel this scale of infinite and then even like billions, like being a billion times bigger, more massive than you are right now and expansive. And then that feeling of coming together into a shooting star, which is still like way bigger than a human body. You got to experience what that like compression felt like, and then flying through space until you hit the Earth. And then when you landed, you were a human again. And so it was almost like this feeling, remembering what it was like to be so expansive and infinite and part of everything. It's really hard to be a human because it feels so small and disconnected. Even the idea of like there are a limited number of trees, like there are a limited number of atoms that exist on Earth. And that scale is so like, even though it feels like a lot and cells are always turning over, it's still at like such a small scale compared to stars. Yeah, there was this feeling of it feels limited, but it's not limited. It's just scale. Yeah. So there was something interesting because the guides wanted you to feel the difference in scale so that you could understand that it's not limited. It's a scale. Maybe we can talk about what that means to you. But I wonder if it even like in my head, what that means is about even comparison is that there is a scale that is specific to you and it can feel like not enough. Like it's a zero-sum game, but it's not a zero-sum game. There is infinite energy. There is, even if it's like $1 billion flowing through your industry, that's still a lot of resources. And so as it trickles down, there's this, it's like a matter of scale. As it gets more condensed and specific. It seems like there's fewer resources, but it's because you're at the bottom of a funnel and so concentrated and dense that it just it's about being small. And it was almost like life. The scale of time here is so different that while you were floating in space, it was like millions of years passed by in the time of your conversation. And it felt really, because you're so massive, like time moved really differently. But when you became a human life is just a blink within a blink within a blink. And so it's not that the resources are limited, like to us, because we're human, 100 years feels like a billion years. That was the big lesson that your guides wanted to think about. Even like just to make sure that you're experiencing life, because all of this encasing your brain or your nervous system or creating a bunker of safety or a shell of safety around you, what that does is that it keeps out dangers, any perceived threats, right? And also anything else. And so the guides wanted you to be able to let life flow through you. And in order to let money flow through you or abundance flow through you as well, everything's going to seem like a threat. So it's almost like an autoimmune disease. You know how even our own healthy cells become a perceived threat? That's also kind of what it feels like with money, that even a nice gesture with money can feel like, oh, are there strings attached to this? What's the angle here? It can block the flow of money or the energy of money when we sniff things out first before just accepting it, receiving it, and letting it flow through us. And because time is short, because humanity is like so small, all of it is like a speck of dust anyway. And so we might as well just let it flow through us, which is a different thing than go out and jump off a cliff. That's not what the energy is saying. What the energy is saying is let whatever's happening happen. Let the guards come down, let the defenses come down, and let it happen without trying to solve for it or have guards or whatever first, without ringing alarms. Let it happen. And then it may let in the occasional danger. But more than that, it'll let in a lot of money, the flow of money. Because it's almost like life has to flow through you for the money to show up in the earthly plane too. Okay. So it felt like ultimately what is blocking the flow of money is this fear of death, or this fear of being fragile. And so when you hit the earth as a meteor, you got to be reborn. You were fully formed, like a grown up again. You weren't reborn from like a young age. You got to be yourself again. You landed in a very particular place. It almost reminded me of like Sandra Bullock in Gravity, on a beach at the edge of a water. And you're like, okay, let's bring up the earth energy. I think I'm ready for it. Every time we brought up the earth energy, it's like a pile of dirt. It felt like you were being buried, like, oh my God, I'm dying. And you would resist it. And so you're like, okay, let's do it. So we let the earth, I just brought up a column of earth energy to support you. And it got all the way up to your hips. And then you're like, I can do it. And so we let the earth come all the way, the mound of dirt come all the way above you, and it just fully buried you. You know, there's a saying I've heard once where it feels like you're being buried when really you're being planted. That was the saying that came to mind. And so when you let the earth overtake you, it was like, oh, this actually feels like a hug. It feels nice. It's dark. It's quiet. And then you started to dive deeper. And I realized that the diving deeper was you growing roots and going to the very edge of yourself as you grew roots into the earth. And then you started to go the other way up towards the sun, and you bloomed as this flower, and you look like a sunflower, and you could reach towards the sun, and you kept growing tall and tall, and your roots were going deeper and deeper. What we were being shown is that, you know, a flower doesn't want for anything, I think is the way that saying goes. A flower just is where it's planted, and the earth gives nutrients, the earth gives water, the earth gives sunlight, and even when the earth can't give those things, the earth does give those things in the form of a human who may come by and water the plant, or, a earthworm that may come and give fertilizer or whatever. Like, there are ways that the earth sends and the universe sends people to deliver these things to flowers, but flowers don't have to move. Flowers don't have to go anywhere. They get to just exist and bloom. That's what this rebirth wanted you to experience, is what it was like to be taken care of, to know that it's going to show up. The earth is providing for you, and it's going to show up in a way if you stand there and allow the earth to rain down on you and the sun to shine down on you, and even the dirt, the earth, to support you from your root. And so, we let you experience being a flower. And then it felt so good that you became a person again. That's when you were like, okay, I'm ready to go back into the abundance. And so we popped the bubble. You got to be in the container that was full of abundance. You got to dive in, and you realize, like, oh, I'm not suffocating. I'm not drowning. I can actually breathe here. But you never would have gotten there if you never allowed yourself to be swallowed by the water with the potential of not coming out alive. That's the thing about surrender, is that, I see surrender as like being swallowed by the ocean or swallowed by the dirt. And it's this feeling where you might die. That makes it so it's like terrifying, but you can't let your survival stuff kick in. Surrendering is just like, well, I guess we'll see what happens. And the other thing that they showed as another visual before you became the flower, when you were buried under the earth, was this feeling of, with a caterpillar, it builds a cocoon. And before the caterpillar becomes a butterfly, it becomes soup. Like, it has to disintegrate into a pool of nothingness. Like, it has to die. It becomes soup. And then that soup comes back together to be a butterfly. And so it was almost feeling like, it feels like you may be resisting the soup part of the process because it's very unknown, but becoming the soup is essential to getting the wings and becoming a butterfly. And so there is like this surrender that's being asked of you, which is really, surrender is like trust, just trusting that you will survive and that you are being held by more than just yourself, and allowing yourself to soften, allowing yourself to be vulnerable or fragile will create space to see that other people will come in and hold you up. The soup. It seems really scary because it feels like death, and death is very scary, but it ends up being most of the time a lot easier than the resistance, because the resistance feels like a lot of sacrifice. It feels like a lot of work. It feels like a lot of energy, where being soup is just being nothing. And so once you allow the disintegration, once you allow the whatever's going to happen, it's almost like it'll be so much easier. Like, I could breathe the whole time. So that's the lesson. And from there, you get to blossom. And from there, you get to be a butterfly. And actually, at the beginning of this session, I pulled a card to see what it was going to be like. What is this session? What is your relationship with that we're going to be healing? And the card that I drew is called the Ultimate Boon. It's a phase of the hero's journey. It's like after the climax, the hero actually realizes their dream, and it's a culmination of all the trials and tribulations, and it's the reward for all of their hard work and sacrifice. And so usually it's like in the form of getting a treasure or the secret elixir. It represents fulfillment of your deepest desires and the reward for your hard work and sacrifice. This moment of realization may bring a sense of unity with the universe. Oh, funny, you did like literally become one with the universe. A feeling of transcendence beyond the ordinary world. It's important to remember, however, that this is not the end of your journey. It's merely the end of the road. You must now take the knowledge and wisdom gained from the journey and bring it back to the ordinary world, because sharing it with others and using it to make the world a better place is the goal. We want this wisdom to be for the benefit of all. And in order to get that wisdom, it's like you have to let whatever is going to consume you and to trust that you'll make it out of the belly of the whale. From there, we did some energetic hygiene where we made sure that we cleared all of your energy centers now that you were in this like reborn place in your heart space. Normally I see the heart space as a garden, like a tropical garden. And it felt like maybe, I don't know if you cry much, but it felt like maybe there was some unexpressed grief or sadness. And what I was being told is that our tears water our heart space, like the flowers that become our heart space. And so it felt like there maybe was like a little bit of a drought. And so all that was in the heart space was these like drought resistant plants. And so we wanted to pull those out. You expressed a lot of grief in the healing. So we created this water that nourished the plants, and we made sure to grow a garden with lots of hibiscus was the flower that really showed up for you a lot. And your heart takes the form of a rose bush, and we kind of just let it be abundant and lush. And same with your solar plexus, which is your power center. It felt pretty good. It just felt like, everything felt like there was like a little bit of a drought. So you needed to be filled up and nourished. For your sacral, which is your second energy center, it's like usually in our womb space. It's our creative energy. I always see that as a fire energy. We just made sure to light the flame of that. And it's almost like the bird that was the entity that was controlling this like nuclear power plant that was you thought like, oh, can't have any flames in the nuclear power plant. That's dangerous. It could combust and create an explosion. So it turned down the flame, but we need that fire for like passion and inspiration. And so we let it light back up. It wasn't that it was extinguished. It just had been turned down. So we like turned up the flame again. And then for your root, you were already rooted into the ground from being a flower. So we really cleared any blocks that existed. We released any vows and commitments, and it felt like there were maybe some vows that were blocking your path to money a little bit. And one of them, it felt like when we asked you to release everything that's ready to go, any vows and commitments, you released heirloom jewelry, which makes me think of ancestral programming, something that had been passed down. And it almost felt like you were holding on to this ring to be closer to whoever you may have lost, but you didn't need to hold on to their behavior anymore because they're with you and you can be connected to them without having to be like them. And so once you release that, it also showed up this cord that was hooked into you. And cords are like energy exchanges with people that take away our freedom a little bit. There's a little bit of bondage because we get stuck in entanglements. And so, you see it a lot in families or relationships or friendships. This cord, it felt like it was a similar dynamic where you felt like you needed to be the same as this person or similar to them, like is how you felt connected, being similar, but you didn't need that. You could just be, connected through love. It felt like they didn't allow it to just be love. Like they were the one putting the pressure for you to be similar to them, but you didn't need that anymore. So you were ready to let that hook go. And then we released any contracts. We cleared any karma or like let you release karma and heal it, which is basically just like unhealed stuff and momentum that unhealed stuff creates. I do clearing karma by throwing skipping stones into a lake that cleanses it. And you wanted to dive into a lake because you wanted to forgive yourself. And it was almost like you wanted to forgive yourself for the ways that you hold yourself back and let yourself off the hook. Essentially, it was almost like a baptism. It was like a lot of rebirth energy. Yeah. And then when we did all of the hygiene stuff, we release a lot of stuff. So there's a lot of space in you. So we call back your authentic energy and fill you up with your own essence. We called in a lot of abundance energy. Once you're all filled up with your energies, you're like, okay, let's go. I'm ready to go. You were ready to go dance and party, but you were like on vacation, but you have things to do. All of a sudden you were like in a bathing suit with a sarong and you had a lei around your neck and you had a drink and it was a hibiscus tea and hibiscus in your hair. And hibiscus is like really cooling. It brings a lot of heart energy. It's related to rose. And I love hibiscus. It's like really rich in antioxidants. I drink a lot of hibiscus tea because it's this vibrant, tart energy, which I just love, high energy. And so you were ready to go. So I wrap you up in a Reiki bubble so that it creates space for integration so that you feel like you can relax. But yeah, so it felt like the energy that you were with now was like you were on vacation, but it was a party and you were also ready to work. which feels like a good place to be. I'd love to hear just first thoughts right off the bat, especially since you just listened to it.
Yeah, so I know. Well, I listened to it partly a little bit yesterday afternoon, and then the kids got home and stuff. I finished it today, and it was interesting because I had a really restless night's sleep. Like, woke up a few times just full of intense feelings. It was really weird. And a lot of it was a fearful feeling.
Oh, no.
Which I thought, no, I know, but I was able to like get myself through it and like walk through it. But it was interesting because I hadn't listened to the whole part that we had gotten to about the fear part. So I don't know. I think it was like I was almost going through it and allowing myself to feel that fear. It was really interesting. And then when it got to that point, when I was listening to your notes, I was like, oh, wow, okay. So anyway, that resonated. And then I don't know. There's a lot of different things that happened. And I'm like, oh my God, okay, oh my God. I will say that this past weekend, I went away for my girl friend has a weekend lake house. So a bunch of girls went up there and we sat out there, and it was the Perseid meteor showers. Okay. And we laid out on her dock for hours, all night, like hours and hours, watching the showers, jumping in the lake, putting on a sarong, drinking drinks. I was like, oh my God, it was crazy. That was
funny.
That was really, really interesting.
And you were a shooting star. I've never seen someone turn into a shooting star before. So that was really funny.
It was a very, very intense night, and I felt wonderful on Sunday. I just felt so grounded and centered, like it was just what I needed. And then when I was listening to your recording, I was like, oh my gosh, it was crazy.
Something that I'm really curious about is, as an entrepreneur, time is time. Time is time. How do you find space to balance, mental, spiritual health with all that has to happen in a day or a week or a month? Oh, okay.
I don't do a very good job with it, honestly. I mean, I think mental health, maybe I probably do a little bit better than like spiritual. Like this morning after I listened to your recording, I did a little bit of yoga, and I actually was like, okay, I'm going to actually sit and meditate for a few minutes, and I know I should, but I don't even do that barely. But then today I did, and mental health, it's so interesting because I do a lot of just kind of trying to control my brain and keep things in control all the time. That's kind of how I keep myself going and like more stable, and like not getting that's also interesting from the session that you did. And, I think mental health, I mean, I do try to, take walks and do yoga, which allow me to like sort of think. I try not to even like, I mean, yeah. And I try not to listen to podcasts while I'm walking. I try to just walk, have it be quiet time. I mean, for me, being around people and being around friends is a really good mental health thing. Like, like the thing Saturday, being like some of my girlfriends that are dear to me and were so trusted. And it was just such a great group. Like that really felt really good. So I do definitely try to do those sort of things. I really, being in nature gives me a sense of spiritual peace and mental calmness. So I do try to get into nature as much as I can, but not as much as like, I wish that I would carve out time to go hiking more often, things like that, which would, give me that grounded and connect me to the bigger world. So I wish I did better.
Yeah, I feel like living here though, because there's trees everywhere, you kind of just have to like stare out a window and it counts. You know what I mean? Like you still get, time is time, or, it's limited.
Yeah.
It is the thing that's finite in the world that makes us human. Death is the thing that makes time a thing too,
yes.
Which is really interesting. And so it's really easy to jump on like, I wish I did stuff more, but really we just can't. It's just not possible. And I'm starting to feel like scarcity, doing abundance work or money work. I'm like, oh, I'm in a scarcity mindset, or I think about scarcity. But then one day I was like, wait a minute. I think that things are scarce on purpose because scarcity is what makes things sacred in a way.
More valuable.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the way that life is scarce, like it only exists within a short window. It's almost like we need scarcity. So the problem isn't trying to get rid of it so that we can have all the things. It's about, okay, because time is limited, resources are limited, what is it that I really value, and then choosing to spend the time there. Yeah. I mean, productivity and capitalism makes me want to be like, okay, my kids are in school. I have 5 hours to do 1,200 things now.
Yes.
And I just can't.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a really hard thing to fight against, is that need to feel like you have to be productive all the time. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that, to your point, carving out that time, and sometimes that just makes you less productive, right? It's like, and that's what I find myself doing sometimes. It's just, I start scrambling to get stuff done, and then I'm like here, and then I'm here, and then I'm here. And sometimes just taking the little bit of time to calm and be centered would allow me to make better choices as to where I actually should be spending my time, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, you touched on this a little bit, but let's kind of go through the pieces of the healing, starting with the brain.
Yeah.
Your headspace, very clear. It felt like walking into the Met, like it was so big
That's
and
so
clear
yeah.
and beautiful. And you had mentioned about keeping your headspace clear. What were you thinking when it came time to the, like it was in a plastic casing, well protected?
Yeah. Well, it was interesting that I felt that I very much felt the nervousness about you guys messing with it.
Oh,
you know, like it was almost like the fragility thing came in, like, no, it's doing just fine there. Don't fuck it up, you know? So that was kind of a little bit of the emotion, like the feeling that I had. And then when you had me touch it, that was like a little bit like, okay, you know, but I don't know. And then when you were talking about like the net and how it actually like looks super fragile, you know, there also was a little bit of maybe pride.
Oh, yes. Of course. Yeah. I mean, it almost felt like it was being kept like that to show like how pure it was. Like it was you were protecting it. It was such pure thought.
Yeah. It was funny. But then, you know, the whole idea of it being net, like the idea that came to my mind was like chainmail, you know, because
that's the word. Yeah.
And you said the gloves that, you know, you used to cut with, and that's basically like what chainmail is. But those gloves, I guess, are even more pliable, but that's what I got the image a little bit. So anyway, so yeah, it was interesting. And then how it carried through beyond the brain and all through all the nervous system. That also, I work really hard at like maintaining, like breathing and like maintaining myself being calm and like trying to just get through everything that I need to get through and like balancing everything and making sure everyone's good, make sure I'm good. And like, I'm constantly working at that. And like my mom, she'll be like, I just don't, you give you so much anxiety and so much like stress. And I'm like, I'm good. I've got this. Like I live in a constant state of anxiety and stress, and I've managed to figure out a way to like figure it out, you know? But then when you were talking about like taking the saran wrap off of all of that stuff and putting it away, it almost was like a physical thing, like down to like my fingertips a little bit, you know, just like, okay. I don't know, bracing myself a little bit to having it be different a little bit. So
what was really interesting too is that the word, you know, anxiety can feel like a whole lot of things to a whole lot of people. I have anxiety, and it does feel like I relate a lot to that, you know, just power. Like there's no time for me to worry about this. I just have to 1 foot in front of just keep moving, or else I don't even know what's it's all going to fall apart.
Yes.
But mine kind of feels like a stick house, like that's all going to topple over. Or a house of cards, I guess, is the feeling that my anxiety has. But what was interesting is that yours felt nuclear.
Right.
How does that work? How do you relate to that word specifically?
Yeah, that was interesting. You know, the only thing that I could really think about that is that I have a role in my life with all my people that I really help. I help a lot of people, right? And it's what I'm really good at. It's what I pride myself on. I'm always there for people to come to and to share with. And I'm good at helping them figure stuff out and work through stuff and calm themselves down. And like, you know, just like this, you know, I'm a psychology and social work major. And the reason I did that is because I always have done this, right? Always have helped everybody. I've done a lot of work to try to like make sure I'm also taking care of myself. So that's what I'm thinking, maybe like nuclear in the sense of my world around me. Like if I'm not able to keep it together, it's going to affect a lot of people. Maybe that's kind of what came to me.
And I guess Chernobyl's like a village. So it's almost like it's not just you, it's like a whole village.
Right. And actually, it's interesting when you said Chernobyl, I'm like, well, Chernobyl actually didn't take down the whole world. It was just Chernobyl.
Yeah.
Like there was effects beyond it, but it wasn't the whole world. It really was Chernobyl, the area around it,
Yeah.
That kind of makes sense to me.
Do you like The Simpsons?
Yes, when you said that was so funny. I do like The Simpsons. Yeah. Well, it's funny because I was just jotting down some notes and I drew a little picture of the little bird and it was like, I don't know if you can see like.
Yes, that's exactly what it looked like. Yeah. Oh my God, that's so good.
I do that. I was like, yeah, I bet he's like that. It's interesting though, because, an owl also obviously came to my mind. I had a tree in my yard that I just had to take down. It was old. It was threatening our house. But again, coming back to the whole idea about money, I didn't have the money to take it down because it was so expensive. But it was every time a storm came through, I was fearing for all of our lives because this tree was going to crash down on us. And the city arborist came out and was like, it has to come down. I'm like, I know, but I need like $8,000. It was a big deal for a long time. And I had friends over one night and they were out back. It was late. And they were like, do you know about the 2 owls that are living in your tree? And I was like, what? No. And then I had this sense of protection with there was 2 owls there was a hole in the tree and it was very devastating for me to take that tree down. It really, it was a physically ill thing, but I knew it had to come down because if not, could kill us. But I was like, but those owls are there and it's their house. And this just happened the beginning of the year in December, I took it down. And when they came and they took it down, and the night before I was out there with my arms around the tree, crying, asking permission and forgiveness and everything. And then the next night they had taken most of the tree down. They had to come back and take some of it out. And I had a friend of mine, we were standing out there looking at all the pieces of wood. I wanted to keep a couple of them. And as we were standing there, also we heard the owls. And then the owls swooped, 2 owls swooped behind our heads and swooped over our heads 20 feet above us, 2 of them, which I've never seen 2 owls together. They called to us and then swooped over our head and went right over where the tree was and then went off into the trees of the neighborhood. Oh. And I was like, thank God my friend was there because otherwise I would have thought that I just made it up.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So they were moving on. They were
moving, yes. That's the way that I hadn't, at first I was like, oh my God, they came by to let me know that they were hurt. And then I was like, no, they went on to move to, other trees. So anyway, it was really interesting. So a lot of that all was this real life thing that was very similar too, is fear involved with it and fear of death and making a choice to take this thing down and losing these owls that were there protecting me. It was just it's crazy.
Yeah. Oh, that's so funny. Yeah. It did feel like ultimately this healing was about death and how your relationship with death is connected to your relationship with money in a way. How did that feel like it resonated at all? So,
I don't feel like I've got a fear of death. I feel like I'm pretty comfortable with understanding that it's all part of life and that death, I do believe there's something that we go on to, sort of the whole star thing and being, I don't believe in heaven and hell and all that, but I know that nothing goes away, right? It's all there. Yeah. And I don't know what that means. And so, I'm not scared of it. I'm scared of the process, how I'm going to die. I'm scared of the pain and the suffering and watching other people around me pain and suffering. And those are the things. But the actual death part, I'm not I feel like I'm not super scared of. But when you were talking about the earth burying, that did give me a little bit of a smothering sort of feeling, which is that was a little bit of I don't want that to happen. The star thing felt much better. That felt good,
Expansive and free.
Yeah, expansive and stuff. Then when you said it's not, but you're not being buried, you're being planted. I wrote that down. I'm like, okay. And actually when I meditated, that's what I was going on. I was like, you're safe and planted. You're safe and planted. And so that was a good shift for me.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I feel like it was really interesting for me because I feel the same way where logically I understand that I've literally seen past lives or, I understand logically that this isn't it. I've done hallucinogens that expanded my relationship with death.
Right.
My mother died when I was really young. And so I was also very aware of death from a very young age. And so I was always the kid that was like, yeah, people die or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
But since becoming a mother, I have a different kind of anxiety and fear that before I was like, I'll do risky things because it doesn't matter. And now all of a sudden I have this, I'm scared of anything, everything. And I'm scared of me dying. I'm scared of watching someone else die. I'm scared of, and again, I grew up with like a lot of people dying. People died all the time. And so when I was seeing it, I can only speak to what my frame of references. And I tend to like lots of things. So it's funny that it was like The Simpsons or, you know, whatever the words that come out are usually very specific to the person. But yeah, it was this feeling like being clear-headed and also not having the space to deal with the real fragility of like I've always been so strong and such a survivor that I can't think about my own fragility or it would destroy me.
Well, and I think, you know, that probably is a little bit more of where I'm at, right? I'm like, nope, just like not allowing yourself to be fragile, right? Again, like to your point too, it wasn't just vulnerability. It's like, and again, with the kids, it is like my fear of death is me going too early and not being there for my kids or them suffering with the pain of me being gone. It's more of that. And it goes, you know, the kids are definitely it makes such a big difference.
Yeah, I almost wonder if it's like something that happens to our brains because I mean, the difference is night and day. I can't, and I am not even someone who is like, I live for my children or whatever. It's just like part of something. Like I do live for my children now, and I don't. It wasn't my choice.
Right. No, it is. It's like a biological thing. I mean, I think that. It probably is. It's like a survival thing, you know? It's like, yeah.
It was really interesting for me because in having to experience it with you, it felt like I had to confront my own relationship with these things too and see how my money, it's almost like if I don't spend the money, I can just prolong what I have. I can make it last longer. And it's almost like I do the same thing with life and death. Like if I just follow the rules, if I just do things right, if I just XYZ, be very safe, if I just hide, if I, you know, what are the things that I control, then maybe I can prolong it just a little bit. And it was like very, it was interesting because, for me to experience going into the void, and I wasn't doing it with you necessarily. I was just, I don't know how to describe it, but I was just like witnessing it with you experiencing the void. And I was like, oh my God, it's nothingness. What's nothingness? We can't be nothing. We can't even think about the fact that we're nothing.
Our brains don't accept that. It's not even, it's not a logical thing.
It's only a thing that you can feel. And so, to get to that, it was almost like to get to that feeling of nothingness, it had to excavate all the other stuff that's shutting it down, or like the fears or the thoughts. Because I think our mind, it can do gymnastics around whatever the body's feeling, and we can like lawyer our way out of our feelings. But to go into the void itself is a whole, there's no space. It's a vacuum. So you like got rid of everything.
Yeah. And to stay there for a little bit too, and be there.
Did you feel connected to whatever ancestor showed up for you?
Oh, it's actually, as I'm talking to you here and I'm like, oh my God. So do you see that picture behind me?
Oh yeah.
Those are both my grandmothers.
Oh yeah.
That's my dad's mom and that's my mom's mom. And like literally I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, I want to talk about Mimi pretty soon. And I'm like, oh my God, she's literally right behind my head.
Oh my God.
I've just recently switched around my desk a little bit. So it was more like that. And so now, I don't know, it's interesting.
Perfect.
So this is my mom's mom. I was very, very connected to her. Like she really helped define who I am. When she died, I found out she died. I was in the woods. I was working with teenagers. We were on like a camping thing. And so I had called home, found out that she had died. And I went outside and I was crying and it was nighttime and this wind came through just like came down through the trees, whooshed through me, and like basically was like, it's okay. Everything is okay. And so I was crying. This wind hit me and then went on. And I was like, it's okay. I stopped and it was okay.
Wow. Oh my God. The wind was significant too. Oh, that's so cool.
It was very like a really intense experience. And so then when you said the wind came and blew us into ashes, me and the entity, and then it was like then it was the ancestor. I was like, oh my God, it totally was Mimi. I mean, like, no doubt. And then having her hug me, she was that's just her. Like, you know, she was very, very motherly in the very classic way. And yeah, so it was intense too. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a really interesting visual because, you know, it was like ashes blowing. So you were like, it was like it would like leave pieces of you and you would go like a bit by bit. It was so great.
No, I envisioned it. Yeah.
So and then at the very end, it felt like this was almost like an ancestral healing too. So it's not even just you're processing or healing your relationship with death or your relationship with money, but it's almost like it's coming down from like intergenerational relationship. And the part that felt that way is that your ancestors were with you on Mimi was there with you. And then at the end, when you took off the jewelry, the heirloom, to me, that always signifies like an heirloom is something that's passed down. And so when people take off the jewelry, it tells me you don't lose your connection with your lineage because it's in your blood. Like it's not going anywhere.
Right.
Yeah. And so
you can't lose it.
No, but you can let go of the programs or the weight of what is passed down in the family. And so that it's just your blood.
Yeah.
And so, it felt like whatever happened, and because the intention is about money too, it's even like, it may not be like you let go of every intergenerational thing, but something very specific to the relationship with death and money.
Yeah.
Is the thing that you're ready to let go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was trying to think about that because I was like, I don't know. Nothing was really coming to mind except for like, you know, like growing up, we always just had enough. Like, it was just like, it was constantly talk about cash flow and, you know, like making sure we have enough cash flow to like, and, you know, my dad was a veterinarian, he had his own practice and, you know, so he was a small business owner and, you know, 4 kids. It was just a lot. Like we did have enough, but we didn't have an abundance. You know, that's kind of my idea about money. I didn't come from a place where our family had a bunch of money. We just didn't have a lot of extra money, but we weren't poor either. Right. So we weren't missing out on things necessarily, except for I didn't get to wear Izod.
Yeah.
I'd wear like the generic, you know, but like, you know, that was like the only thing, like the whole idea of just having enough, like getting enough for the cash flow to give it out and then enough to give it out and then enough to give it out. And that is very much how I do live. So that was the only thing I could think of when it came to like money, you know, and the death thing. I mean, I haven't had a ton of death in my life. My grandparents, you know, my uncle, which I had a really interesting, this is unrelated to this, but it was a energetic thing. I was in an Uber on the way to a friend's party and the Uber driver basically was like, I need to say something and I hope it doesn't freak you out. And I'm like, okay. And she's like, you're doing some amazing things. Like you were super, super powerful. And you're like, you just need to keep going. She's like, and I sometimes hear things from the other side and I hope it doesn't freak you out. I'm like, no, it doesn't at all. What are you hearing? And she's like, it is one of your family members. And immediately I thought it must be Mimi because she's like, it's a male, it's not a father, but it's like a close, like a father. And I was like, okay. And she was like, and he's just telling you, just keep going. And like, you're doing great. And he's here for you and he believes in you. And she was like, he's like tall with dark hair. And I was like, oh my God, my uncle was super tall. He was like the tallest person in my family. And I was like, that's crazy. Cause he died when I was like 12. And like,
oh, wow.
Yeah. And that was really interesting. That just happened, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago. Yeah. Yeah. And so I was like, okay. So Dale is here. Like, it was pretty obvious that had to have been who it was. I mean, this random Uber driver. So I don't know. So anyway, I don't know how I got off on that, but death. So he's the only person in my family that really died. You know, he died when he was younger. He was like 30 or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I don't know about the family struggles with death that I'm trying to let go. I couldn't figure that out really. But the money, that's what I kind of figured out was like that. Just enough, having just enough.
Yeah. Does it feel like, and being at the place of just enough, does it feel like there's an end? Like trying to prolong the end of it? Or does it feel like a flow, like, oh no, I can always count on just enough showing up?
So, I mean, I do believe that enough will show up, but it's that is a stressful place to be because it's always struggling to get that little bit to be just enough. It's never like being able to sit in it and have enough, to have plenty, just enough. So yes, I do know that it'll be there, but it's also this feeling of like, but I've got to make that happen, right? It's on me to find it. And this goes to, I think, what you're talking about with the scale. And it also goes back to last night when I was waking up. And when I wake up, generally the things that keep me awake are my stresses about money. And like, where it's going to come from? How am I going to get it? What am I going to do? What marketing am I going to do? Who am I going to talk to? What am I going to? It's always thinking about where to get it. And it's on me to get it. The scale idea of that there's so much more than just us, right? But we're a part of it. At first I had the thought that there's, yes, the world, the earth is limited. There's only so many trees on the earth, and there's only so many people and so many atoms on the earth. But then the earth is just one little part of the universe, right? So while yes, it is, but the earth isn't a self-contained thing, right? It's part of something bigger and so yes, it's limited, but not really, because it's just one part of everything. So that's where I was getting to like this, the idea of the scale in that regard. But then when I started thinking about money, literally last night I was thinking, okay, who else can I talk to about who could invest $10,000? Like I'm just thinking about like, I'll leave my life and I'm just going through, but it's like so my world without opening up to the scale of like, there's so much money out there and it might not be directly related to me right now, but like just opening up and understanding that there's so much out there and it doesn't need to be me grappling and like just grabbing onto every little rope string I have of a connection to try to find where that is connected to me. Like it's so much bigger out there, that there's plenty out there that can give me plenty. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's interesting with channeling. So it's almost like the words get fed through my mouth and I can hear it as it's happening. Like, oh, that's an interesting thought. And so I like listening to healings too, because I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. I'm like learning as I hear it. But the other thing about channeling is if I get in the way of it, where I'm like, okay, I don't quite understand this. Let me try to figure it out in my head. The words stop.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I could feel that happening with the scale thing. Cause I was like, oh, I don't think that I understand this. And the moment I tried to insert myself, it was just like, sorry, it's gone. Maybe you know what this means.
Yeah.
And so, my guides like literally won't let me say, they're like, are you done? Can I finish what I was saying? And so I have to get out of the way. But I was thinking about the scale thing too, because the imagery, I don't think I said this in the recording, but the imagery that they kept showing me was cells and cells regenerating. And like, yeah, we're limited. We're like one person, but we're like completely new all the time. And there was a lot of death in this, but it almost felt like really death was the thing we had to get through to ultimately get to rebirth.
Because our cells need to die in order for our cells to regenerate.
Yes. And as long as we're trying to outrun death or running out of money or whatever it is, as long as we're trying to outrun it and prolong, like, no, I can figure it out. Just give me a few more minutes. I got it. I can do this. Then we never get the opportunity for rebirth. And so it was like, I tried to write this down earlier. Okay. What they were showing with the scale is that it's like infinite and massive and you're like a billion light years across in space, right? And then as you get closer to Earth, all of that matter gets condensed and let go of the excess. And then you show up here and you're the human size, right? And Earth used to be part of a bigger galaxy. It is part of the bigger thing, but it's only one drop in the ocean that is the universe. And within that drop, it's limited by time and space. And we feel that limit. Because we also feel the universal part of it. Like we know that everything is massive and there's so much, but here we feel like it's a blink. It's life is only a blink of a blink. I only have this much time to figure it out. I only have this much ground that I can cover. And so it feels really limited. But what they kept showing was cells regenerating or turning over. Like your cells have to die and regenerate. Because if they don't die, it becomes cancer, right?
Right.
And then like the trees have to die. Yeah, it's funny that you bring up having to let the tree go, because I live with a bunch of trees too, and the wind was crazy last night. And I keep thinking about, I want to protect the trees, but it's like, oh no, that's not up to me. Like the tree's dead when the tree's done when it's done. And
yeah, trees die. Like they don't live forever.
Yeah.
They reach their limit. Yeah.
And so it showed like trees turning over, and flowers like blooming and dying and blooming and dying. And so it was almost like this feeling like, yeah, there's like a limited number of trees on the planet in this moment in time, but they're always turning over. And so it's like renewable and sustainable and infinite, not in the infinite that we think of as like all existing at the same time, but throughout time, it ends up being infinite. And so thinking about scale and circular instead of linear too will remind us. But in order to access the new, we have to let the old die. Yeah, including the versions of ourselves, like letting ourselves die so that we can be reborn into whatever it is. And I think with creative pursuits or business pursuits too, you hear that a lot about. I don't necessarily think that it means about making a pivot or whatever, but there is something about surrendering, like taking a break, like a moment, a pause, and letting that space of nothing let
the new come in.
Yeah. But as long as we're like busy filling in that space and never letting the void happen, then there's no space for the. And I don't know if I said this in the recording. This feels like a conversation I had yesterday, but I don't even know who I talked to yesterday. There is something about boredom that's really important. And it's like we live in a culture that has no space for boredom anymore. And boredom is what we need for creativity. And it's like boredom is these little moments of death in our day where we're not like constantly carrying on like, no, I can do it, I can make it, it's a marathon. But it's instead of life being a marathon, it's these moments of renewal, refreshing. Yeah, that's interesting. I like, there's a playwright, I think I mentioned this, it was in another tech space. So I was like, there's a playwright who talks about how most stories are told with a climax and then a resolution. And so it mimics like male ejaculation. Like, it's building. Oh, I came. And then it doesn't matter what happened after that. It's like every story nowadays. Yeah. But she, as a playwright, she was like trying to challenge that, and that we should try to tell stories more like female orgasms, where it's like it doesn't have to be this one thing, but it can be
more of
everything
a flow and
the way that we experience time, and circular, and like even telling, like thinking about gossip or telling stories, the way that we like go around a thing and then move on to the next thing. There's like, if we can think about time, or if we can think about stories, or if we can think about life in this like spiral instead of like the straight to the mountaintop, then it creates, to me, I think it creates more space and time, because we always come back around to.
Well, it's almost more surface area, right? It's like when things are kind of going like this, and like there's just more opportunity to do and tell and experience, rather than just like that and then done,
Yeah.
It's interesting. Wow. Really interesting.
Yeah. And so, it almost felt like the scale was about that too, is that we always think of like, I'm now thinking about hockey stick growth is what everyone says scale looks like, which just looks like a big old dick. Like,
yes.
I was like, oh yes, I'm hard. I get it. I love it.
Oh my God. It's so masculine.
Yes.
It is. Well, it's interesting too, because like with my business, like I've been going through a major shift the last couple of months, like shifting away from, okay, if I'm not trying to build a venture capital business, which I've been like in my mind, that's what I've been trying to do for the last 2 years. And like all of my thinking and planning and strategizing and projecting and like everything has been like, okay, how can I get to this? How can I get to this? And like, I'm letting that go, because I'm like, well, maybe that's not what I'm going to do, because I keep running up against issues, and it's like, I'm not getting VC money, which might have to do with me or not, like whatever.
No, it's the system. I mean,
it's a system, right? Exactly. but then it's like, okay, well then where do you get the resources you need? Because I cannot do it without resources, and that's where my scarcity and my freaking out is. I'm like, okay, like I've tapped my resources, so now it's really finite. Like my savings are about gone. I've already talked to my parents; they've already done what they could do, and so I'm trying to find where else in my life I can get the resources to do what I need to do and live. And then I'm like, well, maybe I just declare bankruptcy and go just die that way. But no, I'm not going to do that. Don't worry. But then I'm like, what is the, how do you surrender to that and just realize that maybe that the resources might come a completely different way. They have to come a different way or not, or maybe the business just dies. But that isn't what I want, So then it's like, but then I think it's just like surrendering and realizing this doesn't have to be just me scrambling and like busting my ass to try to find the connections that I've got that will help me with the resources. That surrendering and realizing the resources are at scale. There's so much bigger resources. That's kind of what I'm thinking. But again, it's hard for me to even understand that because I feel like I've tried to access those bigger resources and try to understand the scale, but like that isn't passing my way either. So I don't know.
Yeah, what was interesting was at the end, so when you were planted and you got to experience blooming and being a flower, and the big message that came through was that a flower can't chase after anything.
Right.
It can't do anything to survive.
Right.
All it can do is trust that it will be watered, trust that it'll be nourished, and allowing that to come. And I think this actually brings up a really interesting question at the end of the day, especially like if you're used to hustling or you're used to surviving or figuring it out, or, I've only got me, so I've got to do this, or what does it mean to surrender? And where is the line with, if it's not giving up, like it's not giving up, surrendering isn't like waving the white flag, but it is letting go. And so, yeah.
What does that look like in like real life? That, and that's kind of where I'm like, what does that even look like? Like, I would love to just surrender, but I guess that's where the fear comes in, right? It's like, ooh, you surrender, so I don't know. I don't know what it looks like in real life.
Yeah. And I think, so in the healing, what I saw was that in that surrendering, really, the word I think is acceptance. Mm-hmm. There is something about the image that keeps coming to me now is like outrunning and like dancing around like, no, just give me 10 more minutes. I'll figure it out. And I think surrendering is the accepting, like, okay, this is where I'm at. This is the truth of it. This is meeting the moment where it is instead of solving the moment. And then in that space, it allows the universe to bring stuff to you. But as long as you're running away, this is interesting. Yeah, exactly. Can't get me. And that's also what it was saying. Like, as long as you're running away from it, like, oh, no, I'm not ready yet. Like, when you have collectors or whatever, and you're like, oh, no, I'll call you back. So sorry, I'm in the middle. But really, if they were calling with like, you know what, this has been canceled. It's been erased. You never get to hear the good news either. And so meeting the universe to see what it's delivering is also is what I think is meant by surrender. It's just like, okay, let's have a moment of truth about the moment. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a bad conversation, which is the hard part. I think our fear makes us think, okay, I don't want to hear this. This is going to be uncomfortable. You don't have to tell me the bad news. I already know. But it's like, oh, no, you don't actually know. That's your brain trying to protect you. But here's what the truth is. Because sometimes that outrunning is exhausting.
For sure. Yeah. It is.
And I do think it's hard. Like, it's not just relax and see what happens. It doesn't feel safe, especially when it feels like the stakes are very high. And so that's, I think, the dance. I almost think that in order to be able to do that, you do have to believe in something greater or trust that there's more beyond what we can see and feel. Because that like trust, man, it's hard. It's scary. And I don't know how some people were just born with it or whatever, but
no, it is. It is. It does kind of go back to that fear of death, right? You almost do feel like you're going to die, even though you're not actually going to physically die, but like, they're definitely, and I think it's that understanding of death from a little bit of a different conceptualization, right? Of not just my body dying, but like all of the other parts of death, even just like your cells dying, and your beliefs and the things you're hanging on to and all of that, like letting all that die.
Yeah.
And so something else can come in its place. I mean, that's, I think, kind of what the imagery was with a lot of that.
Yeah. And the thing about thinking of flowers dying. Yeah, seasons was like the thing that came up too. Letting it die doesn't mean that it won't bloom again. It might be like some of these things may be perennial, and those are the things that you keep forever, and some of them may be annual. But yeah, I think that's the thing about letting go, is that it doesn't mean that it's gone forever.
Yeah.
It just being willing to see what blooms in its place. And it could be the same thing again. Yeah. That's kind of what I guess. But that's one of those things that you just can't logic. You just have to feel it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And allow yourself to be planted and just covered up.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yes. Okay. Well, we just have a few minutes left. So I wanted to ask, how do you feel the session has influenced your perspective on money?
I mean, the whole session it influenced my perception on a lot of things. And it's funny because like, as I was listening to your recording, I kind of forgot totally about money, right? It was like all this other stuff. But I think when we first were talking about this, I'm like, I don't know what my issue is. Like, why is it that I cannot get my money situation in place? Like, I know I want to, I know I've got the ability. I know that like, but what is it? It's like something blocking me. And so this gives me so much more to like work with. It's beyond just relationship with money, right? There's like so much more. So it's really helped kind of give a lot more context and a lot more, I don't know, storyline to play with kind of in my brain, like.
Yeah, I love that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it kind of takes this thing that feels so like big and everything in life and kind of puts it to scale, puts it to perspective compared to what is happening in life. Yeah.
Which is right. And to understand how it's all part of all of that too. It's not just my bank account, it's like, there's so much more. So yeah, I think it's really interesting. It just feels much more expansive. It was great. It was really fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you too.
Like, I didn't even know exactly where we were going to go. And I'm like, this is a lot. And it really struck so many chords. So it was crazy. It was awesome.
Yeah. I feel bad because when I think about how I talk about energy work, I'm like, oh my God, it's so fun. You want to do a fun session with me? And I'm like, hi, it's death. Every time. Here's your deepest, darkest fears.
No, but it is fun. I mean, because it's exploring this stuff and still being safe. Like, this is fun, but like, but it has to be real. If it wasn't real, then why do it? Right. Like, if it was just fun and games, and let's just go have fun and games. Like, it has to be real. It was fantastic. It's fantastic.
And there you have it, a really powerful conversation with Tamara Lucas of myPANDA app. In editing this episode and listening to it before, putting it out, I got to go on this journey again. And I think I finally got to this place where my fear of death, I can let go of my own death grip on that fear of death, because I've touched what is on the other side of that for me. And I think in my explorations, I thought like, oh, I just got to get rid of this fear of death. Okay, I got to find acceptance of whatever. Or maybe what's on the other side of this fear of death is trust. Or maybe what's on the other side of this fear of death is peace. I don't know, but I want to see the trust or the peace, or I want to see what's on the other side before I let go of this fear of death. But I will say that this healing with Tamara probably kicked me into a cycle of life, Lionsgate portal. It's been lovely. Since then, it's forced me to confront a lot. And in that, I feel so abundant. I feel like things have been really hard financially. It seems like one thing after another, just when we don't need it, or, that feeling of being buried alive in drowning in debt, or being buried alive by all of these worries. And I finally got to this place where I can look back and see that, I haven't made any money, but I've gotten so many things for free this year. I even just won in October. I got to have a full month of solid core Pilates and did a full unlimited 30-day membership. and got to exercise because I wanted to exercise. And then I got this email like, hey, you're a raffle winner. and that kind of reminded me, oh yeah, I've been able to meet a lot of people and attend a lot of events and get so much free lunch and free office space and reduced office space for months after that. I've been able to experience a lot because abundance is not just about money. But when we're so focused on survival, it really does narrow our vision. And ultimately, I think we get into this a little bit about where it's almost like survival brain puts us into binary thinking. So I'm either gonna make it or I'm not. I can either pay my mortgage or I can't. You know what I mean? I think that through this experience, it kind of loosened, again, that death grip in a way where I could see and sense and feel all the little ways that people have really showed up for me. And I'm so grateful. I feel, #blessed and abundant. And honestly, my financial situation has not changed. If anything, it's become more nuclear. But I feel peace and I feel trust. But really, it's because I think what I discovered at the other end of that fear of death, to examine that thought, I had to ask, what must I believe about myself to be so scared of death? And I realized it's that I really love myself. I really love this life, and warts and all, flaws and all. I believe that there is something greater, that we do cross over, that we become one with the universe again, and then we get to experience another incarnation. But who's not in that other incarnation? This body that I have resented at times, that I'm frustrated with at times, that I'm hypercritical of, this life that I could pick apart in a million ways. You know what I mean? There's like a million ways that I have thought of how hard my life is, how I'm such a victim to circumstance. And even then, I don't want to lose it. I am terrified to lose it. And so what must be true is that I really love not just me, the soul, the essence, whatever, but I must really love this body. I must really love this human. And I don't think I've ever actually believed that. You know what I mean? I think that there are aspects of myself that I can love, but the parts did not add up to a whole. You know what I mean? But now I think it's not that I now love myself. It's that I realize this whole time I had to have loved myself, but I couldn't see that because I was too busy focusing on the death. This is like that. I was on the shadow side thinking about, well, how do I survive? How do I make it? How do I keep myself alive? How do I keep my children alive? How do I keep my family together? How do I do all these things? Focused so much on that I couldn't even see this big, bright, burning star of self-love that must represent. Meanwhile, looking everywhere around me for it. Like, do I deserve love? Please tell me you love me. Please validate me that I deserve love, when it was there the whole time, but I couldn't see it because of this death grip on survival. So I just want to thank Tamara for allowing me the opportunity to confront my own versions of scarcity and survival thinking and this intense fear of death in myself, because I don't know if I I'm sure, I'm sure I would have gotten there eventually, but I really feel that just by being able to witness her journey, it cracked me open in a way that I am eternally grateful for. And so I think that it's a beautiful opportunity that when we are being buried, when we are being planted, when we are becoming soup, to know that on the other side of this, the only thing that we can find is more of ourselves. So I hope that you and I may experience more of ourselves after this journey. I hope you find some magic from this episode and that it opens the door to blooming as you journey forward on your path. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time on A Kind of Meadow with Rhiannon Vaughn.